How Furious 7 said goodbye to Paul Walker, a scene-by-scene breakdown, as posted on Mashable. Writer Josh Dickey. Warning, the following account contains several spoilers from Furious 7, specific to how the filmmakers handled the death of Paul Walker. If you haven't seen the film and intend to, read no further. Cars don't fly. It is a blink, and you'd miss it moment from the early goings of Furious 7. Paul Walker's character, Brian O'Connell, is strapping his young son Jack into the growing family's minivan when the boy hurls his toy vehicle out onto the pavement. He tells the boy that cars don't fly, and the boy repeats the line back with a giggle. Moments later, there's a big, unrelated explosion, and it would be easy to dismiss this minor emotional beat. But if you caught it, the moment is truly haunting. Jack's toy is a red sports car, a two-seat coupe with a rear spoiler that closely resembles the crimson Porsche Carrera GT that Walker was riding in when the $350,000 supercar crashed in November 2013, killing the actor and driver Roger Rodas. Whether the filmmakers intended this or it was a mere coincidence that they decided to leave in is hard to say. Walker had shot about half of his scenes when he died, forcing Universal to delay Furious 7's release so they could rebuild the story around what they had. Very much to the credit of director James Wan, not to mention the producers, editors, writers, and hundreds upon hundreds of visual effects and sound editors, they pulled it off. Because if you weren't looking closely for seams, you'd never notice them. After his death, Walker's brothers were used as stands-in for several shots, to which his face and voice were added later. In some cases, he was edited into the scene from B-roll footage, and in others, his face is obscured or he's off to the side. But reinserting him wasn't their only challenge. The filmmakers also had to find room in the story to let Walker go, and in a way that would allow the franchise to carry on. Most assume Brian O'Connor would be killed off or at least indisposed in some plausible permanent way. That's not what happened at all. Here, beat for beat, is how Walker's death was handled on screen in Furious 7. His first appearance. After a pair of opening set pieces that don't involve Walker, we finally see him for the first time. It's a close-up of his face. He's behind the wheel, his high-top van skate shoes on the gas, revving the engine. And it cuts away to show he's driving the minivan, dropping off Jack at preschool. It's our first glimpse of Brian's adjustment to his new life with Mia. "You'll get used to this," says the teacher, taking Jack from the vehicle, to which he responds, "That's what I'm afraid of. That toy car." It's another day and Brian is strapping in Jack to take him to school. "What do you say, parking brakes slide right up to the school?" he playfully asks Jack, the kind of reckless driving maneuver that Walker loved to pull in real life, where he was every bit the gear-headed speed freak that Brian O'Connor is on screen, and the reason he got the part in the first place. That's when Jack hurls the toy, prompting the "cars don't fly" line, which Brian will repeat during the tower sequence in Abu Dhabi as Dominic, Vin Diesel, crashes between buildings, with Brian in the passenger seat. Brian is pulled into family life. Brian's new role as father and husband is obviously pulling him away from the thrills he loves most, a major theme of his turn in Furious 7. That was almost certainly part of the plan before he was killed. His scenes with Mia are clearly him, including when he tells her, "I've screwed up many things. I couldn't live with myself if I screwed this up too." But clearly this theme was amplified after the fact. Later, in another moment between Dominic and Brian alone, it's obvious that Diesel is acting against shots of Walker, reacting to something else. "You missed the bullets," Dominic says. "Yeah, that's messed up, huh?" Brian responds. But there is something uncanny about his voice and expressions, and the camera never actually catches them together. Then Dominic drives it home. What's real is family. Your family. Hold on to that, Brian. There's another sequence later in the film when Brian seems to think he might not survive the crew's latest mission. Mia, in a safe haven in the Dominican Republic, gets a call from Brian who says, "Something's about to go down. If you don't hear from me in the next 24 hours, I need you to take Jake and move on." Mia is stricken by his tone. "Don't do that. The way you said that sounded like goodbye. Say something else." His end of the conversation could easily have merely been a warning that she would be in danger. Was her end changed to make it seem more ominous? In any case, he merely says, "I love you, Mia." Han's funeral. Another early moment that seems too close to home, yet was probably shot before Walker's death. The funeral for Han, Sung Kang, who was killed in Tokyo. With a close-up on Walker's face, we hear Roman, Tyrese Gibson, say, "I can't do any more funerals." Then he turns to Brian and says, "Just promise me, Brian, no more funerals." Brian responds, "Just one more," and the pause is excruciatingly long before he finishes the thought. His, referring to the bad guy, Deckard Shaw, played by Jason Statham. The huge bus stunt. The mountainside chase, easily the high point of the movie, is punctuated by Brian's daring escape from a bus that is teetering over the edge of a cliff. In trademark hoodie and skate shoes, he runs up the side and is saved when Letty, Michelle Rodriguez, drifts in just long enough for him to grab the spoiler of her hot rod. Flung to the ground but safe and sound, Brian lies on his back for a moment, arms outstretched in a crucifixion pose. "You good?" Letty asks him, and all he offers is a flat, "Thank you." That might have been his last line of spoken dialogue, because the cast and crew was on a short break from shooting the mountain sequence outside of Atlanta when Walker returned to California for the charity event that involved his company's sports car. Abu Dhabi. Furious 7 didn't shoot any of its Abu Dhabi sequences in the Middle East until the year after Walker's death, which can only mean one of two things. One, they had already shot much of the dialogue on a soundstage beforehand, as Walker is seen fully talking and interacting with Diesel throughout the sequence. Or, two, the digital artists who put Walker's face onto his brother's body are freaking wizards, maybe a little of both. There are moments when Walker looks ropey, even spectral. There are other moments when he's delivering lines, while his face is front and center, looking perfectly natural. The dicey stuff is mostly when they're outside, at the beach, and later standing at the precipice of a hole they just smashed in the side of a skyscraper. In all likelihood, they only went to Abu Dhabi to pick up those exterior shots, and had to put Walker in to salvage their exteriors. But if the whole thing was cooked up, slow clap. The last chase. There are just two noteworthy connections in the final boss battle scene. In one, Brian dives from his car as it explodes in flames. Moments later, he pulls Dominic from his car just before flames begin to flicker inside of it, and starts administering CPR. Spooky stuff. The final tribute. It's really the last 5 minutes of the movie, however, that have everyone talking. The battle is won and the crew is at Malibu Beach, watching Mia play with Jack down by the water. She calls to Brian to come join them. "Duty calls," says Dominic, and Brian stands up. And it's in one of the few moments from the whole film when he doesn't look quite right. Brian lifts up Jack and spins around, repeatedly kissing the boy, and puzzling enough, this looks 100% natural. His face is ever so slightly obscured as he turns, but then is fully in view. Did they film the beach frolic as B-roll, never intending to use it in this way? It would sure seem so, as the crew begins to talk about him, looking on but as if to suggest that he's not really there. "Beautiful," says Roman. "That's where he belongs," says Letty. "Home, that's where he's always belonged," says Dominic. "Things are going to change," says Roman. Dominic stands up as to leave, and Ramsey, Natalie Emmanuel, says to him, "You aren't even going to say goodbye?" "It's never goodbye," Dominic says, as Wiz Khalifa's "See You Again" begins to play. Now Dominic is driving away from the beach in a silver Dodge, his trademark American muscle car, when a white Japanese exotic, Brian's standard choice, pulls up alongside him. "Hey, you thought you could leave without saying goodbye?" Brian says, his last line in any Fast and Furious film. Again, it's fairly obvious that this shot was created later, but it works okay. The two begin to drive side by side through the Malibu Canyon, and Dominic begins speaking in voiceover. "I used to say, I live life a quarter mile at a time, and that's why we were brothers, because you did too." A montage of moments from previous films begins. again with Dominic's voice. "No matter where you are, whether it's a quarter-mile away or halfway around the world, you'll always be with me and you'll always be my brother." Then an overhead shot of the two cars driving together, and they came upon a gentle fork in the road. Walker's white exotic drifting to the left, Diesel's silver Dodge staying on the main route. The camera pans up to the sun and the screen goes blindingly white, with two words flashing on screen. For Paul.